The North Atlantic War by Michael Trela. Prologue, Part 2. On the 5th of January of 2040, the Greenland Parliament sent an embassy to Denmark and called for a meeting with both the King and Prime Minister. During the session, the ambassadors put forth their intentions for complete autonomy and self-government, which entails unconditional and absolute political and economic separation from the Kingdom of Denmark. A long silence met them, only to be broken by a reply that stunned the ambassadors. "You have our consent." That was it. No taking it under consideration, bringing it before the privy, or anything? The embassy was stunned, but was quick to recover and take the signed document placed before them before anything could go awry. They left Denmark and returned to Greenland feeling like they had completed a mission, though a couple ambassadors were concerned about why it had been so easy. With their complete independence and autonomy made official, Parliament decided to hold an election, partially to get the right people in to run the changing nation, partially to give the immigrants a greater say in the government, and partially to elect new members who were ready to run a nation that wasn't a constituent of Denmark. Despite warnings that elections so early would lead to an overhaul of the country's current political system, hasty judgments and worse, they actually turned out to be a major success. The campaign for the nation's chancellor was a tight and excitable one. The vote split quite evenly between three candidates. In the end, the three realized that their opinions for running the country were actually more similar than they thought. And so in a private meeting between the three of them, they agreed that James McKinley, an American Catholic who had immigrated from St. Paul, Minnesota, was the best of them for the job. On his first day in office, McKinley was faced with a major issue that seemed to spring up out of nowhere: a new name for the country, and likewise a new way to run it without causing a disaster. A majority of people were of the mind that Greenland had become an unsuitable name for their new nation. The name had been given it millennia ago by a civilization that now didn't exist, and a barbaric one at that. And let's not forget that the fact that Greenland isn't even green anymore. McKinley spent his entire first day in office pondering over what to do about this unexpected dilemma. The solution didn't come until he was at home that night. Inadvertently thinking out loud, his son overheard him asking himself, "How do I figure out what to rename a country?" His high school son Mike said the answer instantly. Just have Parliament come up with the new set of names and let the people vote on them. It was ingenious. The very next day, McKinley proposed the process to Parliament. They unanimously agreed. 20 names were concluded upon to be sent out to the public for their vote. No campaigning was involved. The people saw the names and voted on which they wanted. Among those to receive the most votes were Americana, the Confederate States of America, Novaland, and Republia. However, these runner-ups were all beaten by one that was a bit more formal and less biased toward one ethnic group: the North Atlantic Republic, often shortened to just the Republic. Thus it came to pass that out of the ashes of Greenland's economic collapse, the North Atlantic Republic emerged. Parliament then decided that because the population had grown so much and was now less concentrated in a single area, they would divide the Republic into 10 self-governing regions, each governed by its own regent and sub-parliament: Novaland, Republia, Archangel, West Northland, East Northland, Drachma, Kronos, Kristalos, McKinley, and Sorbet. The Chancellor was hesitant to allow a region to be named after himself, but the people and Parliament insisted that it be done. The national anthem and national emblem, flag, remained the same. Little did they know that dark days lay on the horizon for their newly formed country. While the North Atlantic Republic was forming out of the ice and snow of Greenland, Denmark had been tied up in its own domestic affairs as the Communist Party quite suddenly began to rapidly gain support among the populace. The Privy had granted the Prime Minister executive power in order to quell the communists and prevent a national revolt, which was why he could legally grant full independence to the Republic by his own authority. He knew that to oppose Republic separation would have been a catastrophic blow to his regime, and chose to let it pass. However, his executive power and political maneuvering proved futile in the long run, as in June of 2041, the Communists took the majority of votes in an emergency election and promptly removed and/or relocated all members of the former regime, many of whom were ultimately executed as traitors to the People's Republic of Denmark, including both the king and prime minister. Once they had gained full control of the nation, the newly communist state of Denmark had to find a way to stabilize the economy, which they had gone to such great lengths to ruin before they lost the people's favor. It was too early to drastically increase taxes, and the Faroe Islands were just too small and poor to provide any real assistance. They thus turned their attention to the resource-rich, newly founded, fledgling North Atlantic Republic. Government papers were circulated stating that Denmark had been betrayed by its former rulers, that the Prime Minister's actions with his executive power were unjust and illegal, and that Greenland still belonged to them. Agents were sent out among the common folk to further fuel the notion, while the government paid off several civilians to do the same. By December of the year, Denmark was in an uproar. The rest of the world took notice when it was discovered that Denmark's military spending had gone up by 25% in 6 months. The United Nations inquired as to why this had occurred, but Denmark staunchly refused to tell. It was while a UN ambassador was reading over Twitter comments that it was discovered that they were planning on taking Greenland back, by force if they had to. When the Republic heard of this, they immediately sent an embassy to Denmark with the intention of settling the matter. To their surprise, as well as that of the whole First World, the Danes refused them passage into the country. The very same day that the embassy was turned away, Denmark publicized its intentions and threatened the Republic with force. Even while this was going on, the Communists were seeking support from neighboring nations in this endeavor. 15 years ago, they could have easily gone in and conquered them alone, since they were still a rather primitive island with only 57,000 people living on it. Now, they were an industrialized nation with a population 30 million strong. The United Nations absolutely refused to lend support, while NATO only helped when a member state was invaded, not invading. However, a door opened when the United Kingdom's economy suddenly collapsed due to a stock bubble that unexpectedly burst right when it was about to rise again. Millions of people lost their jobs and their homes. Riots broke out across the nation. Ireland began lashing out against Northern Ireland, and the British Parliament was powerless to stop it, as they had been the heaviest investors in the market when the crash occurred. Communist Denmark seized the opportunity and sent a delegation to London. They proposed to lend Britain the equivalent of $70 billion to help stimulate their economy. All Britain had to do was help them in taking back that upstart excuse for a nation that rightfully belonged to them, the North Atlantic Republic. They told them that the impetus for war would kickstart their economy, which would in turn work with the money lent to them by Denmark to keep them going until they had secured victory. Denmark would give the UK a third of the resources captured, which they guaranteed would be more than enough to bring Great Britain back to glory and stability. British Parliament, not knowing much about the new North Atlantic Republic and seeing no better solution to their plight, grudgingly agreed. On the 15th of January, 2042, the People's Republic of Denmark and the United Kingdom declared war on the North Atlantic Republic. Faced with no alternative, the Republic, though secretly, declared war on their aggressors as well. Thus was begun a war, the first war between modernized industrial nations since World War II. It was a war that would shape the future and determine the fates of much more than just those in the three nations involved. It was a war that would forever go down in history as a major milestone for the world. A war that, were it not for shrewd policies, timely events, and bold individuals, could have escalated into World War III. This was a war to define modern war. This was the North Atlantic War.